I am an African. I believe in sharing and just utilization of a transboundary water resources.
The Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam will be the largest hydroelectric power generating plant in our continent, Africa.
The dam project is now finally here, almost done. It's an amazing achievement of the people of Ethiopia to accomplish it.
Abai is identity. Many trace their origins from it. Abai is culture. Many gather around its revere. And now, it's time for Abai to be light and defeat the darkness for millions.
The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam carries the hope and aspiration of millions of Ethiopians to get access to electricity by addressing the problem of scarce energy supply.
I'm a responsible citizen of the world. I believe in cooperation and good neighborhoodness.
The Renaissance Dam will also give substantial benefit by easing the burden and cost of excessive sedimentation and flooding. It will also benefit my brothers and sisters in Egypt and Sudan.
The Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a testimony that the children of Ethiopia can finish what they have started.
I am an Ethiopian living in Great Britain, London, and I'm eagerly waiting for the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam.
When completed, a Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam will bring the aspiration of integrated Africa near a reality.
I'm an African and I care about my neighbors. I believe in equitable and reasonable use of the Nile.
I believe Ethiopia has a natural right to use Abai River in an equitable and a reasonable manner.
The GERD is very important for the development of Ethiopia as a nation and also beneficial to the development of Ethiopia's neighboring countries.
Therefore, hand in hand, let's use God's precious gift, the Nile, equitably and reasonably.
Good afternoon, good evening, participants, our presenter, Professor Aaron, and fellow advocates of GERD from around the United States, Canada, and across the world. On behalf of the New York Tri-State GERD support members, I thank you for your participation and welcome you all to our first speaker series monthly webinar. The monthly speaker series webinars are part of the New York Tri-State GERD support advocacy work around the Nile and GERD. As you may be aware, the New York Tri-State GERD Support Group is a community-led initiative that was launched just about a month ago in the New York Tri-State area. And its mission is to advance the causes of both equitable water sharing use of the Nile waters, as well as the GERD. And this includes educating the international community, public diplomacy on behalf of GERD, and of course, financial mobilization to complete the largest hydroelectric plant essentially in Africa. So I encourage you to visit our website at nytristateforgerd.org. These monthly speaker series are meant to create an opportunity and a platform to bring the wider community, policymakers, academia, and the various stakeholders together for a dialogue and policy perspectives around the multidimensional aspects of the Nile waters and the GERD, while also bringing awareness on current developments and opportunity for cooperation. I also wish to use this opportunity to call for other GERD groups and representatives in the audience. So whether you're from Minnesota, Boston, or folks from Washington area like Aspire, to collaborate in our advocacy efforts in this significant endeavor of national interest. Our GERD advocacy vision and principles are based on equitable, sustainable, and fair utilization of the Nile waters. So these monthly webinars are meant to encourage and invite dialogue, to build trust and cooperation on the basis of this vision. Today's session focuses on the historical legacies and politics around the utilization of the Nile waters, the challenges these arrangements continue to pose, and areas of common interest and cooperation among the Nile Basin countries. Today's presentation will be delivered by Professor Aaron Tesfaye. He is a professor and chair of the Department of Political Science at PATERSON University in New Jersey. He's conducted extensive research around the Nile waters and published various scholarly articles and papers. Most notably, his book, The Political Economy of the Nile Basin Regime in the 20th Century, speaks on and elaborates some of the themes that are going to be discussed today. He's also one of the members of the New York Tri-State GERD Support Group. We're very lucky to have him, extremely grateful for his contribution and deep knowledge in this area. So in order to make your engagement and participation interactive, we would like to actually maybe tell you a little bit about the format, somewhat kind of unorthodox, so to speak. So we're going to divide the talk today into two segments. And again, the reason why we did this is to encourage dialogue and give you an opportunity to have a conversation with Professor Aaron. During the first 15-minute segment, Professor Aaron will explore the historical aspect and issues around the Nile. Thereafter, we will open this session for dialogue and question and answer. The second segment is 20 minutes long. We'll focus on the politics of the Nile, which of course will be again followed by another interactive dialogue, which is going to invite you to either raise your hand, be called upon, turn on the mic, and have your dialogue moment as well and share with the audience. So throughout this webinar session, remember, please, we do encourage you to send questions, comments, and your insights using the chat box when it opens for each question and answer session. You can also raise your hand for verbal intervention. Professor Aaron, thank you again for your valued work in this field. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Beniam, for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation on the Nile and the GERD, the Grand Renaissance Dam of Ethiopia, with the Ethiopian community abroad and at home, of course, and international guests during this webinar. As a background, the Nile is the world's largest, longest river. It contains the second largest lake, Lake Victoria, and of course, Lake Tana in Ethiopia. It contains also the oldest and largest dams, the oldest and most controversial treaties, which I'll go into later on. The Nile Basin is the cradle of ancient civilizations. Ethiopia, which goes back to millennia, and of course the discovery of Lucy, the world's ancestor, and Egypt, the civilizations of Egypt and Sudan also. The Nile is also unique in that it's the most populous region of the world in terms of Nile Basin, 250 to 300 million people. By an estimate by 2025, it contains 10% of the population of the African continent. Diverse ethnic group, religious group, and linguistic and diversity. It's shared by 11 countries, and it's also a region of extremes in terms of poverty, in terms of high variability, in terms of climate change, and of course conflict, which has been taking place on again and off again, and so forth. Next. This diagram and table shows us the contribution of rivers to the main Nile River that reaches Cairo. The Blue Nile and its tributaries flow into Cairo, and they deposit along the way something like 72.5 billion cubic meters of water, which is essentially about 86% of the total Nile waters. The White Nile that starts from Lake Victoria, upstream states, contributes about 11.5 billion cubic meters of water, 14% of the total water flow of the Nile that reaches Cairo. And in total, we have 84 billion cubic meters that reach the Aswan Dam, and so forth. But Ethiopia's contribution to the Nile water, to the main Nile River, is not just water. It's millions and millions of cubic meters of fertile soil, and so it does contribute to food security of Sudan and to the food security of Egypt also. The diagram basically shows you the contribution of the White Nile to the main Nile River, which is negligible, about 50 billion cubic meters. But as the diagram indicates, the Blue Nile and its tributary, the Atbara, which is a tributary of the Tekeze River, contribute particularly from the months of June to November, 60%, 64% of the Nile waters. That is during the period of the Ethiopian Kram or winter. Next. So there are several challenges that the people of the Nile Basin face. There are increasing demands due to population growth, both in Egypt, in Sudan, and in Ethiopia. There are problems with the current allocation of the Nile waters, which I will go into later on in detail. But also, the Nile Basin is affected by climate change and environmental degradation because of the unilateral use of the water by the riparian states. And fourth, there is this unilateral development plans of the Nile Basin nations. And this is not going to be sustainable in the long term. And finally, Ethiopia has built the Ethiopian Grain Renaissance Dam, or the GERD, and of course, Egypt historically has been diverting the river of the Nile for its various projects, which I'll go into in a minute. These two diagrams show us a cross-section of both the White Nile in color and the Blue Nile in black and white. As you can see, the White Nile starts from Lake Victoria in color, flows into the Sud. These are the swamps in the Sudan, and then it joins the White Nile in Khartoum, and then flows into the Aswan Dam and eventually into Cairo. In terms of the white diagram, that shows the flow, cross-sectional flow of the Nile, the Blue Nile water. It starts at Lake Tana and its environs, travels around about 500 kilometers until it reaches the borders of Sudan, and then it basically plunges down the Ethiopian escarpments to Khartoum, where it eventually joins the White Nile. Something to note here is that there are dams that have been built by Sudan. I actually show here 2 dams, but there is a third one near Khartoum called the Jabal Aulia, and there is a 4th one on the Atbara River on the Sudanese border. And so these dams are supposed to control. They're supposed to be used as a flood control by Sudan and so on. I'm mentioning this because both Egypt and Sudan have been saying, no nation in the upstream states has a right to build a dam. Next, please. So this table shows the population growth of the Nile Basin since 2005, and the population of the Nile Basin countries is going to increase, and it's not going to decrease at all. The water in the Nile Basin is not something that is permanent due to climate change and other matters. in the future, the Nile Basin countries will be facing water scarcity. That is why we say negotiation now based on equitable distribution is better than negotiation later, because negotiation later is going to be much more expensive and much more difficult. Next. So the legacy of the Nile River is that it poses a lot of problems for particularly for the upstream states, including Ethiopia. Here is the 1929 water agreement, which was signed by Egypt and by Britain. Britain supposedly representing the upstream colonial states, did not represent Ethiopia. And the division of water was 48 billion cubic meter for Egypt and 4 billion cubic meter of water for the Sudan. Okay. Later on, in 1959, a new agreement was signed. The reason a new agreement in 1959 was signed was Sudan became independent in 1956. And so you have this Sudanese nationalism, population increase, and so forth and so on. And the intent of the Sudanese elites to grow the economy. And so they were not in agreement with Egypt on this. And so there was this bilateral agreement between Egypt and Sudan. This time, Egypt's share was 55.5 billion cubic meters, and Sudan's share was 18.5 billion cubic meters. And of course, Ethiopia was basically ignored, 0 cubic meters of water. And so these two agreements also shut out all the riparian states such as Kenya, Tanzania, and the rest. Ethiopia, there is a long history about Ethiopia and the Blue Nile between 1950 and 2020. During the reign of the Emperor Haile Selassie, during the rule of Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam, and later on, of course, Prime Minister Meles Zenawi and the APDRF. And I'll go into detail about those things later on. But the challenge of the Nile River, the Nile politics, is the 1929 Nile Water Agreement, but especially also the 1959 Nile Water Agreement, which favored both Sudan and Egypt. Okay, all these fundamentally were challenged by the Nyerere Doctrine, which basically argued that the upstream states should not abide by colonial treaties. That was then. We are independent now. And so our task or our goals of national development should not be decided in Cairo or Khartoum. And so I'll talk a little bit about the Nyerere Doctrine maybe in the question and answer sessions.
Thank you, Professor Aaron. That was a very provocative set of sort of information on the historical aspects and issues around the Nile. We are opening the question and answer for about 10 minutes to 12 minutes. So we invite you again to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, make a comment, have a dialogue. Please raise your hand and we will be calling on you. And for anyone who also would prefer to write their questions, please feel free to enter your questions or comments in the chat box. So while maybe to get this started, I did have perhaps a question for you, Professor Aaron, just to give us a sense in terms of the riparian countries. What is the need? Which riparian countries need the Nile River waters the most, and for what purposes are they used in terms of how they use the waters?
Yes, I mean the countries. There are countries in the upstream states that need the waters of the Nile or its tributaries, for purposes of agriculture and food security. Particularly countries such as Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, Sudan, and of course Egypt also, that practice rain-fed agriculture. Okay, the rains, for example, in Ethiopia have been intermittent, and Ethiopia does need to eventually, in the long term, use the water of the Nile, and and other river systems also in Ethiopia to enable for its agriculture to be successful, as do the other riparian states also. Now, among the other riparian states, there are states that do not depend on the rain to grow their agricultural products. There are plenty of rivers, for example, or other water sources in Uganda, the Congo Democratic Republic, and so forth and so on. So the countries that are vulnerable are some of the countries that I mentioned.
So one of the interesting sort of dichotomies, if you will, is the particularly claims of Egypt and the claims of Ethiopia. So Egypt, as you noted, makes about 0% contribution to the flows of the Nile River, yet it affirms something called historical rights. These are exclusive to use the river, the waters of the river. Ethiopia contributes about 86% to the water flow, and of course other things, as you've mentioned, in terms of fertile soil, etc. But it affirms a right to an equitable share. So what do these positions mean with respect to the historical rights that Egypt is affirming and the equitable share that Ethiopia is affirming?
Yeah, historical rights basically refer to the absolute territorial integrity of a river basin. In other words, no upstream states can do anything to curtail the flow of water to downstream states. Now, that principle is outdated now, okay? That principle, historic rights, or the no harm rule, is basically outdated. And instead, what we have, and this is enumerated in the UN, in the 1997 United Nations Transboundary Water Convention, has adhered to, or the International Law Association has created what is called limited territorial sovereignty. It asserts that every riparian state has a right to use the waters of the waters of the international river, but it is under a corresponding duty to ensure that such use does not harm riparian states. So the convention focuses rather, instead of historic rights or the no harm rule, but rather on equitable use of a transboundary water. This has been the case since 1997.
So a key problem, and let me see, actually, before I continue, there's a hand that's raised. If I could just, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
No, okay. First of all, I want to thank you all the I think I don't might have sisters or brothers and sisters, to initiate this meeting. I'm from the Southern California. With a profession, I used to be a civil engineer working on highway freeways, but I never have any experience with dam construction. But I do have the interest, to support Ethiopia, and because of the daylight saving, I became a victim, and I jump in so late. My apology. Dr. Aaron Tesfaye, you're a professor at that school, and I haven't, since I came late. Are you into civil engineering, or what is your career? And then the other one is, which I want to get advice from you. We do have a GERD, they call it Cluster 18 in Orange County here in California. and I was one of the supporters to initiate and get the fundraise. And we've done our share, and we do have some challenges, how to motivate others, how important the dam is. And I heard 2 days ago that Dr. Abiy, he made a deal with solar energy, and that will be another great source for Ethiopia, since we are the 13th sunshine, which and I want you to throw some ideas on those, and I want to thank you. And I've seen Dr. Busrat, and I want to thank you. He's been a great icon, a great foundation to the communities. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. No, I'm not an engineer. I'm a social scientist. I do write about Ethiopia. And what I write about is public information. You can access William Patterson University website. And so forth. So, do you have any specific question on the Nile issue or on the GERD? An answer?
No, actually, I don't have. I'm following up. I don't have a question as far as construction on. I know it's like 80% right now going forward.
Right.
Since you are in the social science, I think you could throw some ideas how to motivate the people, to come together, to support, to do a contribution, which is, I think I'll call it like it's a life for Ethiopia, which is going to be removing poverty, and then we're going to move us to industrial, we're going to make us very sufficient, and it will move us forward. That's what I thought.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I could address it in an inclusive manner. If we get other questions from the audience, including the moderator, Beniam.
So I'd like to open the mic for Atolako. Please, Atolako.
ይቅርታ አቶ አይደለሁም
Okay,
ወይዘሮ ዘመናይ
I apologize, ወይዘሮ.
It's okay. Thank you very much. There is no way you would have known that. Thank you, Professor, for the introductory remarks that you've given us on the Nile River Basin. I was at some point involved in an effort to encourage the 11 riparian countries to form the Nile Basin Initiative. And so I was aware at that time that a number of other countries were also interested in utilizing the Nile. For instance, there was some indication, I believe Uganda, Tanzania. I've not been following it up very seriously. And I don't know to what extent they have succeeded in implementing their plans and what has been the impact on Egypt and Sudan in that respect. Right. Secondly, I don't know if it would fit in this segment. To my mind, it would have been a good idea if the negotiations were conducted among the 11 riparian countries rather than only between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan, because that would reduce the undue pressure that's being put on Ethiopia to compromise and tilt the discussion in favor of Egypt, which is what we are witnessing right now. So okay. I'd like to know what your views are on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe in part two, that is when we'll be covering some of the questions you raised, the Nile Basin Initiative of 1999, the comprehensive framework agreement among the 11 Nile Basin states, which really did not pan out. And so maybe I could address those when we do the presentation in part two. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you for your questions. And I think in the interest of actually the nature of the questions that are being asked, as well as the opportunity, again, we can extend the second segment of question and answer even further. So let's continue with the second part of our webinar talk today. Professor Aaron will be exploring the politics of the Nile.
Next, PowerPoint. So, so the politics of the Nile basically is the use and misuse of the Nile River, okay? So in the 1980s and 1990s, Egypt took a unilateral action in diverting the Nile waters into the desert, okay? Because it had a new project called the New Valley Project, and started building artificial lakes using the water from Aswan Dam, and basically building a water pumping station called the Mubarak Station. And it started creating an agricultural complex in Western Egypt in order to produce cash crops. And also it had plans to move entire communities from Cairo into that region by diverting the waters of the Nile, okay? And so this was done unilaterally. Egypt did not consult with anybody. It did not consult with the upstream states. It did not consult with Ethiopia. It did not consult with anybody at all. These are facts on the ground that Egypt established in the 1980s and the 1990s, all right? Next. Okay, so this is the Mubarak Station, surrounded by a lake, the Mubarak pumping station. Here is the Toshka project. You can see it in the map of Egypt, and below it are the lakes that were created by diverting water from Lake Nasser, which is just behind the Aswan Dam, and creating this fact on the ground. Egypt is also building a new city east of Cairo with the help of the Chinese. This new city is gonna need a lot of water, okay? And so forth. And so there was no consultation about this. Of course, nations are sovereign to do whatever they wanna do, but in using a transboundary water system, at least the upstream states should be notified. So what Egypt has been doing is doing its own thing and then prohibiting other nations from constructing any water-related projects, even on the tributaries of the Nile River. Next. And of course, Ethiopia, in response, in the 1990s, after a consensus, the diplomatic work that was done with the upstream states and so forth and so on, started building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Now, there is a reason why Ethiopia started building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The Amharic word is Hiddase. And basically, the Ethiopian government, when started building this dam, was announcing to the world that, we are changing our brand. We no longer want to be known as a country of famine and poverty, and so forth and so on. And so here is a new beginning. We're announcing it. We're going to build the largest dam in Africa. Okay, we're going to produce so many megawatts of electricity for our own use. Okay, we're going to light up Ethiopia. We're going to use hydropower to push for industrialization and so forth and so on. So this was a monumental undertaking by Ethiopia. Okay, and of course, this was opposed by Egypt, not outright in the beginning, but eventually. And, the financing of the dam was done by the contributions of the Ethiopian people, okay? And so on this late date, Egypt and Sudan are getting belligerent and telling Ethiopia it cannot fill with water the Grand Renaissance Dam that is supposed to generate electricity, not for Ethiopia only, but also for the Nile Basin states. Next. All right. The reason we have put this slide in here is to demonstrate that here is the Grand Renaissance Dam of Ethiopia in red, but here are the dams of Sudan. You know, the Roseris Dam, the Sennar Dam, the Jebel Aulia Dam, and there is the Gariba Dam on the Atbara River that flows into and joins the main Nile River that reaches Egypt. Okay, next. So we say, in terms of the challenge of the Nile Basin, the argument is that it is really a classic collection action problem, okay? Where the pursuit of individual interest, with the pursuit of individual state interest, in terms of exploitation of a global common, the Nile Basin is a global common, diminishes the benefits of everybody if it's done unilaterally. You know, it's called the tragedy of the commons. You know, if a lake is used, for example, by individual farmers using the traditional manner of carrying water for irrigation and so forth and so on, chances are the lake would last a long time. That global common will last a long time. But if somebody discovers a water pump and starts using the water pump at night, then another farmer will also go into the town and buy another pump. And then this unilateral pumping of water by all farmers, disregarding the interest of others, would eventually in the long term diminish the return to everybody. And so the lake would be dry. And so the arbitrary division of the Nile Basin waters based on the interests of states and communities unilaterally will not benefit anybody else. So the solution is cooperation. And the solution is an agreement, a framework where the interests of one is not hurt by others and so forth and so on. So with this in mind, the Nile Basin Initiative in 1999 was cobbled together by all the 11 countries of the Nile, and the objective was to come up with a basin-wide agreement, and so forth. And the participants of the initiative were the Nile Basin states, bilateral institutions such as the World Bank, and local communities that live along the river basin and so forth and so on. So, you know, and so after that, there has been a series of Nile water conferences, you know, in different years and so forth and so on, taking place in different capitals. The purpose was to come up with an integrated water resource planning to prepare an inclusive treaty. And this treaty, as we're going to see next, it was the fleshing out of the comprehensive framework agreement. Okay, the fleshing out of the comprehensive framework agreement, or also called the CFA, you know, all the 11 riparian, actually the 10 riparian states were present at that time. 6 countries out of the 11 signed it: Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and Burundi. Egypt and Sudan vehemently opposed it. Ethiopia, Rwanda, Tanzania, Uganda ratified the CFA. South Sudan declared its support, but wavered. It took no action. The Democratic Republic of the Congo was undecided also. And so we find a comprehensive framework agreement basically frozen in time. Okay, the CFA needs ratification by 6 countries in order to get 50% plus one, so that it can enter into in force, and you know, legally, and then some kind of an institution could emerge out of that, something like a Nile Basin Commission, and eventually it could become a regime, and it will work for the equitable utilization of the Nile waters for everybody. But Egypt and Sudan, of course, refused to sign the CFA. Next. So the framework was constructed out of the 1997 UN Watercourse Convention. Conventions are written by the International Law Association. These are eminent juries picked by the United Nations, and from time to time they get together and cobble a convention. And this is the second convention. The first one was Helsinki Rules, written in 1966, and so forth. The CFA was not successful, in brief. Okay, I think Egypt, particularly Egypt, made a big deal about Article 13 of the CFA that has to do with water security, and so there was a lot of wrangling and so forth and so on. And so the CFA, as I said before, was not ratified. Next. So meanwhile, Egypt continued, Ethiopia continues to build the GERD. Egypt opposes it vehemently. Its claims are: one, it will decrease the water flow to Egypt; two, it will decrease the water flow for Egypt's irrigated area; three, it would decrease electricity generating power at the high dam, at the Aswan High Dam. Meanwhile, Sudan wavered between Egypt and support, between opposition and support, and formally supported the dam on December 4, 2013. Okay, it actually had supported the dam, the GERD Dam, on December in 2013. And since then, there's been a lot of diplomatic activities lasting about 4 years in order to facilitate the dam, the construction of the dam, and the filling eventually of the dam, and so forth. Next. So the benefits of cooperation are several, okay, for the Nile Basin states. Enhanced food production. If the water is equitably utilized, then waterless countries in upstream states, those countries who are identified as being dependent on rain, could grow food. Okay, food security is very important for the people in the upstream states. Energy production, the GERD's energy production, electricity production would be shared using some kind of instrument among the Nile Basin states. There will also be a linkage between agricultural productivity and industrialization. What do I mean by this? A rich peasant in the Nile Basin will want to consume industrial products, okay? And so this is a forward linkage to industrialization. There will be enhanced interregional trade, okay? If everybody is happy and if everybody is cooperating in terms of using the Nile waters, from that we could go to interregional trade. There could be a basin-wide economic union. I can imagine that, an economic union, and so forth. And economic growth, of course, because of the cooperation based on the Nile River, could stabilize the population of the Nile Basin, currently close to 300 million people, and so forth and so on. Next. As things stand, okay, there is now an increasing competition and dispute over the Nile River. Existing treaties, which basically give monopoly power to Egypt and Sudan, are not working for the upstream states, including Ethiopia. The Nile is becoming a source of conflict instead of a route for cooperation. But before and earlier on, when the CFA was being considered, it was actually seen as contributing to an African peaceful spring at that time. And of course, the GERD is a sign of leveling of the playing field. Egypt cannot dictate the development policies of upstream states. Okay, countries like Ethiopia need the GERD to generate electricity. About 60% of Ethiopia does not have electricity, for example. Okay, so electricity is very important. So one country cannot dictate the development aspirations of another country. Okay, so and there are actually large areas for possible cooperation, as I mentioned in trade, as I mentioned in shared hydropower, as I mentioned in the opening up of transportation corridors in the Nile Basin countries. The GERD could also benefit Sudan in terms of flood control, in terms of if it's handling irrigable lands, of course, the generation of electricity, and so forth and so on. So cooperation really, in my opinion, is the only way out for optimal utilization of the shared water courses of the Nile River.
Thank you, Professor Aaron. I will open we have some chat questions actually and comments as well.
Okay.
And I will open for a dialogue. So please, if you feel like you'd like to jump in, you're more than welcome. So starting with Paulos Brhanu, he writes, given that Egypt claims to be the most dependent on the Nile River for survival, do we have information on what it's doing or plans to do in the following areas to mitigate the perceived water shortage? Engagement in less water-intensive agriculture, stopping or limiting Nile water diversion projects, desalination, stopping or limiting new urban developments in the desert, etc., and any such approaches. So given the context, both in terms of the need by upstream countries for greater use of the Nile River, as well as some things that you've mentioned, Professor Aaron, regarding the climatic situation with respect to projected in the future, how that's going to tax water sources in our area. What is Egypt doing?
Well, I mean, Egypt has been, in terms of the use and misuse of the Nile waters that reach Egypt, Egypt has been criticized by some scholars. For example, cultivating water-intensive crops, such as rice and sugarcane, and so forth. So I've not heard any news whether Egypt has stopped doing this. Okay. Egypt has also in the past diverted the Nile waters into Sinai through the Al Salam Canal or the Peace Canal at that time. This is soon after the Six-Day War, which was Israel and so forth and so on. Egypt needs, to do a number of things. It needs to recycle water. It needs to stop growing water-intensive crops. It needs to stop diverting water to create new communities. At least it should contact. It should get in touch with the upstream states also in what it's doing, because some of the water diversion actually is not sustainable. The water in Lake Toshka, in the Toshka project, or the New Valley project, for example, these waters are not staying at all. They either evaporate or are sucked into the desert and so forth and so on. So these things are a total misuse of the Nile waters. All right. As to desalination, that is a very expensive undertaking, and given, even though Egypt annually gets around $4 billion from the US, I don't know, we have no data or information whether Egypt has undertaken the desalination project. But that's an idea. That's one idea that Egypt should entertain and so forth and so on.
So I'd like to invite Engineer Bahailu Asafa to the conversation. Thank you for your patience, Wizaro Zamanai Lakau. Right after, I will open the mic for you. Engineer Bahailu, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm calling you from California, so this will tell you that how much I'm excited to listen my friends from the East Coast. As far as desalination, the Egyptian government has spent will be spending close to $50 billion because they know that for a fact by the year 2050, the population of Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt will come close to 500 million people. So it has to find its sources because of the scarcity would be much higher. So she's doing a project, so that's fantastic. But the thing that I have here is, the situation is there is a political problem, there is a diplomacy problem. I'm a technical person working on this thing, but technically there is a solution. I mean, right now there are 4 dams in Sudan: Roshir, Marwan, Sanar, and also there is one other dam. The total capacity for them is 20 billion cubic meters of water. Okay. Ethiopia this year will be filling the dam at 13.8 billion metric cube. Okay. So this is not an issue because right now, even at its lowest, okay, we can get more than 35 billion metric cube. What we are doing currently is we are a group of hydrologists and engineers. We want to predict before the start of July, what is the probability of rain in terms of the quantity of water, so that we can declare to the world that there will be enough water that will basically make it easier for Ethiopia to fill the dam. We did exactly the same thing last year when we put the 4.9 billion metric cube. We work with the Sudanese hydrologists, everything. We have a fantastic relationship, by the way. We understand each other. The issue is not the filling of the water. The issue is the allocation of water. So right now, Ethiopia gives everything to Sudan and Egypt, but we want to reserve, let's say let me put a number, 10 billion, 15 billion metric cube for our usage, okay? So this one, we can do it in different ways. As the professor said, economically to be beneficial to other countries. I don't think Ethiopia wants to hurt the other countries. What we're saying is we want to get equitable water for ourselves. The 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s drought should be a reminder for us that we don't want to go back to this. So therefore, Ethiopia's pursuit to this project is very, very important. That's why this year is a very, very important year, because that's when we will be installing the 11 turbines. So that way we'll be able to produce power, even though it's at the lowest level, because as you know, to produce power, you need height and also discharge. So that's what gives you really that numbers. So we'll be able to produce the energy. So I think the professor really put together all those agreements that we have. If people are not willing, agreement is not going to help anyway. And also the other countries, the United States and other mediators are not solution to our problem. The solution is going to be between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. And we have to really sit down, work out for the benefit of all of us. So basically we produce electricity. We can sell it, we are doing to Sudan at the moment. And also there is this East African grid that will connect also up to Egypt. And then Egypt can give us something in return. So that way we can make a communal type of an arrangement. So it's going to be a win-win situation. So I believe right now, which I'm still fighting, is that we have a solution, but we want the politician to really open up their eyes and work high on diplomacy and also on technology. Thank you.
Thank you, Ato Zamanai.
Engineer Bahailu.
Oh, I'm sorry, Engineer Bahailu. My apologies.
That's
so
okay.
Thank you, thank you. Wazuru Zamanai, I'll just open the mic for you. Please join the conversation.
Thank you.
Mic problem.
Okay. What is?
I cannot hear.
Okay, how about now?
Oh yeah,
go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, engineer, for the technical explanation. It's reassuring that we don't have a technical problem in terms of the water. Just as I had all along understood that this was more of a political problem rather than a technical issue. I wanted to ask Professor Aaron, what was the motivation or the lack of motivation for the other riparian countries from ratifying the CFA? Is it because they have alternative sources of water and therefore the Nile is not that significant for them? Or were they under political pressures to which they succumbed? I'm asking this question because I firmly believe that while the three core countries can reach an agreement, it will be to the benefit of Ethiopia to have the other riparian countries behind it, to add pressure on Egypt. Egypt historically, as we have seen, has been very spoiled. It has been having it all its way without anybody challenging it. And it would want to continue as long as it can, using diplomatic and any other pressure. Because if it wasn't for that, if it had agreed to the CFA, by now it would have had certain alternative solutions to its problems or anticipated problems. So I would want to get your views on that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a combination of things. The CFA was not ratified by some countries, such as the Congo Democratic Republic, Burundi, and Rwanda, and all. These are not rain-dependent countries. If they were, I'm sure they would have ratified the CFA. But also, we must not forget Egypt's diplomatic acumen. Egypt had relations with Uganda beginning in the 1930s. Even during the colonial era, the Ons Dam that was built by the British in Uganda during the colonial era, after independence, was actually being serviced by Egyptians. Okay, so Egypt had a long relationship with some of these upstream states, including Kenya, including Uganda, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and so forth and so on. South Sudan is a good example of that. It just became independent from Khartoum a few years ago, and still, South Sudan has been making connections with Egypt also. There is a possibility that South Sudan may be interested in building what is called the Jonglei Canal in its swampy areas and so forth. And actually, the design of that is being drafted by Cairo. So it's a combination of things. And initially also, of course, Ethiopia in the 1990s did a lot of diplomatic work to basically persuade the upstream states to stand by it. And you're right. Without the upstream states, Ethiopia's diplomatic effort, I'm afraid, and this is just a personal opinion, is not going to be successful, and so forth. So more persuasion, more arm twisting, more cajoling is needed in terms of getting the upstream states on board. Good question. Thank you.
So thank you for that engaging set of questions. We do have maybe one more, perhaps final remark regarding, again, how do we move forward? So it seems that there's a bit of understanding that the legacies, the historic legacies, continue to be key problems in terms of finding opportunities for cooperation or a new regime, establishing a new regime based upon this principle of equity. So if you can take perhaps 1 or 2 minutes, final thoughts, Professor Aaron, where do we move from here? Is the politics such that it does not allow for any forward movement?
The politics does allow for some kind of a forward movement, but this is the thing. As far as Egypt is concerned, if it allows, quote unquote, the filling of the Grand Renaissance Dam, it is allowing the proverbial camel in the tent during a snowstorm in the desert. I mean, a sandstorm in the desert. The Bedouin hurriedly puts up a tent and kneels down the camel and makes sure that the camel's head is in the tent, because he depends on the camel to travel in the desert. But on occasions, the camel had stood up and taken the entire tent by itself and run away. And so the fear of the Egyptians is, if we allow a precedent to be set, Ethiopians filling the dam, then other states, other upstream states would also be encouraged to build water-related projects on the tributaries of their rivers, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's trying to prevent a precedent from being set up. Okay, and so I believe the veto power of the 1929 and 1959 water agreement between Egypt and Sudan and Britain is just antiquated, and the upstream states and Ethiopia had said no to this imposed water regime. We want a negotiated water regime that is equitable for all. We want to establish some sort of a Nile Basin Commission that will determine fairly on who gets what of the Nile waters and so forth and so on. For this, we're going to need robust diplomacy that will be inclusive of the upstream states. We're going to need robust assistance from the Ethiopian diaspora community, or also Ethiopia's allies in the West. And we must advocate for this, because we see the imposed regime in the status quo as unfair and unjust and unworkable.
Thank you. So as we wrap up, it'd be remiss without calling on Dr. Bisrat to actually join the conversation. So that would be our last participant to join. I will open the mic for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Aaron. Thank you, Professor Beniam. It was a very informative conversation that you led. I just wanted to point out that despite the fact that we don't have what Egypt calls as a legally binding agreement, and there is this process of negotiation that is still going to be undertaken under the chairmanship of the Africa Union chair, we do have an agreement that was signed by the three main countries, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan, which is the Declaration of Principles of 2015. It's on the basis of that Ethiopia has continued the construction, the filling of the first dam, and the filling of the second, the first filling, and the second filling in July, hope will be carried precisely on that base. So there is the Declaration of Principle, I think, constitutes certainly an agreement that has been shared, that has been agreed to by the three parties. So we should just factor that in our discussion. And one last point I would like to mention is there was a question that Atoshi Farrao had asked with respect to what do we do, all of us Ethiopians, in at least contributing towards the completion of this incredibly important undertaking, the GERD. So perhaps on our side, from the New York Tri-States GERD support group, there is a process that is being followed with respect to fundraising. So either Atwaklilu or Sophie, if they could mention, because we have to link up with the other GERD groups that are also operating, certainly in California, in Washington, and other areas. So I think it would be useful if we hear something regarding these fundraising efforts.
Thank you. So if any member of the support group would like to perhaps elaborate, but again, this idea of engaging and working on behalf of this vision, but on the basis of principle of equity, I think it's very, very important. So the idea that Ethiopians, wherever they are very much concerned about the well-being of their country and the need actually to provide some basics. Egypt, for instance, has 100% electrification. Ethiopia, 60% of its population lives in the dark, cooks using basic sort of wood and such. And so there's a very tangible and immediate necessity. But there's also linkages and love, historical and contemporary, between the cultures of this people. So our purpose, our vision is not to actually entrenched, for instance, the existing mistrust, but actually to develop trust, to build trust. And as Professor Aaron, as a scholar in terms of his books, as well as this presentation, the aim of it, again, is not just to bring the word out and educate the wider public, but to also create a space for dialogue, meaningful dialogue amongst Ethiopians, Sudanese, Egyptians, other members of the riparian Nile Basin countries. So the GERD is one dam, but the Nile and the people are much bigger than that. And the conversation is about that. And so our advocacy work is focused on helping to successfully build this dam, which has the word Renaissance in it, because that's the vision. It is aimed at lifting up this country and civilization to where it should be. And so in that regard, Ethiopians are mobilizing from their paychecks, from their own monies, and so we are also participating in that. And we have very effective persons that are working very hard and passionately to advocate, but also to mobilize resources on this very important issue. So thank you for that reminder, Dr. Bisrat. I appreciate that. This has been a wonderful conversation. This is our first webinar. We will continue to have a monthly webinar for the entire year. We are very excited, again, to promote and invite dialogue amongst our brothers and sisters in Egypt and Sudan and riparian countries. And this is a forum of a fair place, a safe place when we can have these conversations. So I'd like to thank very much Professor Aaron for this really insightful presentation. So thank you. I'd like to thank you, the participants, for engaging, as well as for your questions. It's very appreciated. I hope we can continue in this spirit. Thank you again to all those who joined us today. You made this session possible and enjoyable. We encourage you to stay tuned and find out more information about our work. We're very passionate about our work, as you can see, and there's multiple levels: mobilization of financial resources for the GERD, public diplomacy, as well as educational and various events that we're organizing. So you can go to New York Tri-State4GERD.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and our YouTube channel as well. So as I noted in my earlier introduction, we will be having monthly webinars. So you can always follow that by going to the website event page. For those who are interested in this webinar session, our first webinar session, it is recorded and it will be available for you on our website. So please visit. I'd also like to take this opportunity to announce that we will be launching a public diplomacy campaign next week. This is a very urgent matter, and this is regarding the proposal by Egypt. So this is a public diplomacy campaign next week, and this is regarding the proposal both by Egypt and Sudan to change the negotiation venue, add mediators such as the US and EU. That again is going to sideline the African Union, very important. participant, but the African Union, and it compromises Ethiopia's interests. And remember, the key thing about Ethiopia's position, if you think about it really, is the fact that we are advocating for equitable, fair sharing of Nile water resources, not a zero-sum game, and certainly not exclusive control over the Nile River. And so this is an important and urgent matter. So we ask for your support and also for you to keep this in mind in terms of your attention. Thank you again, Professor Aaron, participants, and all the GERD group support members working behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. Thank you. This ends today's webinar session.
Bye-bye.